production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
A2H, engineers, architects, and planners, creating an enhanced quality of life for their clients and our community. More about A2H's services and markets is at a2h.com.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The juvenile justice system in Memphis and Shelby County tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Stephen Bush, head of the Shelby County Public Defender's Office. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Richard Graham, executive director of JIF, a nonprofit that works with juvenile offenders. Thanks for being here.
Great. Good to be here.
Mark Billingsley from the Shelby County Commission. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Stephen, I'll start with you, and we'll get deep into it, but I just kind of want to start. People know of a lawsuit and a whole lot of trouble with juvenile justice in Memphis that culminated in a lawsuit from the Department of Justice and a settlement in give or take 2013. Your office has gotten involved in a way that had not been involved in many, many decades. Where does that stand? How have you gotten involved over the last couple of years, and what's going on?
Right. We are 2 years into this adventure of building out a better system for representing kids that are coming into contact with the justice system.
And that involves lawyers, that involves?
Lawyers and social workers and other supports. As part of the agreement, we are charged with building a state-of-the-art system for representing kids that are colliding with juvenile court.
And that the Justice Department is still involved. They're monitoring. Is that an ongoing monitoring as you get more involved?
You may recall this is the first time the Justice Department had ever moved against the juvenile justice system. So they are watching. They have monitors as a part of this. In fact, the entire country is watching this work. It's the first time the Department of Justice has ever moved this way.
All right, we'll get into more of what's going on within there, but I want to get Richard, talk about what JIF does.
JIF was created back in 2003, and our mission is to break the destructive cycle of juvenile crime through Christ-centered intervention. And basically, we work with youth that are assigned to us by the Youth Services Bureau of Juvenile Court. We have case mentors that befriend these kids, work with them, talk to them about good decisions, bad decisions, and consequences, and we do that over a 16-week period.
Okay, and we'll get into a bunch more of that, but I just want to get everybody in. Mark Billingsley, from you're 2 years into being on the county commission.
I am.
What can the county commission do that isn't being done to address issues of juvenile crime, juvenile offenders, and the justice system and how they're treated?
Well, when I came on 2 years ago, I felt like we sort of talked around the issues. And in my role, I've really tried to get our county commissioners more engaged. I've encouraged and invited them to visit places like JIF. On the county commission, I chair law enforcement, fire, corrections, and courts. And quite frankly, if there's not a safety net for some of the kids like JIF provides, quite frankly, they end up in the corrections center, again, something that I chair. And we spend $65 million a year in Shelby County just on corrections. And while it's certainly a fiscal and workforce issue, there's a lot of victims as well. So it's really been my privilege over the last 2 years to know Defender Bush and get to know Richard. And there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done. And I think your leaders on the county commission have to have a role in that.
And do you get pushback from constituents who say, I just want to lock them up and throw away the key? They're kids. I don't care if they're kids. They're violent crime. They're out of control. We just need them out of our community. Do you get pushback when you hear about anything other than putting them in jail?
No, absolutely. I represent probably the wealthiest county district. I represent South Cordova, Germantown, Southwind, all the way down to Windike. And I've even had very good supporters of mine call me and say, Mark, I appreciate the work you're doing on the county commission, but these people need to get a job. You need to throw these kids in jail and throw away the key. I'm not soft on violent crime. Defender Bush and I had that conversation the other day. there's no, I'm not forgiving on violent crime, but some of these kids that we're talking about today go home who want to be on the right track, but who may go home to two parents that are gang members. Now, can you imagine if you're a child living in poverty, which 30% of people in Memphis are, go home, even when they've got a positive influence with someone like Richard Graham, but yet their parents are encouraging them to stay in trouble.
And that's where you feel like alternatives, that you have to support alternatives and find alternatives for those kids.
I think we have to. Stephen could talk to this better than me, but you have 1 in 3 African American men who have a great chance in Memphis and Shelby County and being at the correction center.
Yeah.
It's a workforce issue. Let's just say you don't care about the kids, you don't care about whatever. Look at the financial aspect of it. Sometimes I have to talk about that issue to convince some of my conservative constituents. Do you really want to live in a city that potentially will lose more and more jobs if you don't address a systemic issue?
Yeah.
And
Okay. Bill.
Stephen, so leading into this and the Justice Department report and the settlement, there was so much discussion about what happens when a juvenile, a boy or a girl, enters the system. So flesh this out for me at the work that your defenders do at the court now. Is it at that point when they are in the system, or is it at the point when they are just before going into the system?
Now, our work is going to be after kids are already in contact with the system. You should know that there's an extraordinary amount of work going on across all of these systems, and the court's made a lot of great strides to keep kids out of the system, kids that do not need to be there. They divert a very high number of individuals before they get very far into the system. Most of the focus is on things that are really bad situations where there is violence, the things that hit the media and things like that. But the vast majority of kids that are hitting the system are just kids. Mm-hmm. This is normal adolescent behavior that over time brings them into contact with this. One thing we do know that we've learned in the last couple of years, these kids, for the most part, are incredibly poor. They are growing up in dire circumstances. They and their families face enormous challenges, and that really the real effort long term has to be geared toward prevention, toward stopping the school to jail pipeline. But there will always be kids, and there will always be behavior that they're going to be kids in front of juvenile court. So,
Richard, for JIF, when do you begin to interact with these children?
Really, the age group for us is 12 to 18 years old. So our average youth is probably 15 years old.
About how many kids do you work with every year?
This past year we worked with 158, but if you averaged it out over 12 years, it's about 100 kids a year.
And what works? I mean, with kids who, when you look at your success stories, and I'm sure it's not 100% success stories, but when you look at your success stories, what worked for them?
I would say the mentoring relationship, having a value system that they can fall back on, because their value system right now is just, this is how we roll. And we basically convey God's value system to them. And we're creating a program, launching it in December. It's called Live Life Together, and we're looking for mentors to come along after our 16-week program and just live life with these kids every other Saturday and commit to doing that, just hanging out with them. And that will be key to moving these kids along, because we see that the longer we can hang on to a child, that the longer they mature and they start to figure it out. A lot of them know that gangs are not the answer, but they're not sure what the alternative is.
Yeah.
And you just hit on it a minute ago. Programs are great, but programs pass. But the mentor relationship does not. And we've seen time after time, if we can hang on to a youth till he's 19 or 20 and invest in his life, then we can see some phenomenal, transformational, generational change.
Bill.
Mark, so much of the attention on the commission on this issue comes when you all vote on funding. But from your remarks and from past discussions we've had, this is about more than funding. If nothing else, it's also a rearrangement of where the dollars have gone traditionally.
I think you're right, Bill. You know, it was interesting. Thanks to Richard, I was able to meet some 15-year-old gang members recently at JIF. And it's interesting, I asked them, what could I do in my role to best help you? And I had preconceived notions of what they were going to ask me for. Bill, what they asked me for, a group of 7 15-year-old gang members who want to get on the straight and narrow now, they've said the most important thing you can do for me is I need a job. I want a job on the weekends. I want a summer job. There are kids that want to fight their way out of their neighborhood. Some of the kids I talked with have 75% of the kids in their neighborhood are members of gangs. But it's interesting, we talk about workforce a lot in this community, but let me tell you, when a 15-year-old kid says, help me get a job, there's where we need to be spending our money, in my opinion.
And what can the county commission do in that sense directly? I mean, you can't really hire them, but is it youth job programs, or is it just bringing in more employers, or? Well,
I think we have to, unfortunately, because of our economy, when I go into the Kroger store or Schnucks or Fresh Market, because of our economy, we see, look who's sacking your groceries these days. It's senior citizens who need money for prescription drugs. It's the folks that, when I was a kid, Steve and I think talked the other day, when I was a kid, I had those entry-level opportunities. Right. They're really not there for those kids that need an initiative. I think it's a whole lot of things. Recently I sponsored funding for JIF. They needed more funding to try to get some more kids through. I think if we don't invest in some community-based programs on the front end, you're going to certainly pay for it tenfold on what Mr. Bush is doing.
Well, you go ahead. Yeah,
absolutely. These programs are incredibly important. But Richard, you hit on something a minute ago, that it's the relationships that grow out of them around these kids that when it works, you can always go back and find those key relationships that supported that child, because the real goal here really is, as that child matures, as that kid gets older, you tap into that natural resilience that is in any kid. And as long as there's some hope and listening to them and knowing that what they want are jobs, they want meaningful things to do to fill the gap between school and the rest of their world, which, quite frankly, given the level of poverty here, is a really dire and depressing place to be. So I think it's going to take a lot more than the county commission, a lot more than government. This is going to require every part of our community to step forward and to create the right pieces.
When a kid gets to you in the juvenile court, is everything lost? Is it too late?
No.
That's not a point at which it's too late.
No, it's not too late.
So what tools do you have or what can you do? If you're not just gonna, if you go to the court and try to cut a deal, not put this kid in jail and say, look, let's give him another chance or her another chance. What besides JIF? But what can you do?
This is what's so promising about the reforms that are underway in the juvenile court system, because almost all of it is informed by what we now know about brain development. The same good work that the Urban Child Institute did here to teach us how important it is from the point of conception through the first 36 months. That same research, that same science is driving everything. And there is a way to respond to kids that are getting into trouble and to hold them accountable in ways that are developmentally appropriate. That's what all of the resources on the defender side are meant to be geared for, but also all of the reprogramming within the court system and what our community providers are doing. We have to do things that are smart when kids hit the system so that we don't make things worse.
Right.
Let's be clear, hitting the system is not good for people. The research is not promising. If you're in detention, the future is bleak.
Yeah.
So the court's done amazing things to keep kids out of detention except when it's absolutely necessary.
Is detention is jail?
Yeah, detention
and
is
that,
lockup.
I mean, some people just say that's just training ground. So as soon as kids who start going into detention, well, then they're going to meet more gang members. They're going to learn more trade craft to be, flippant about it. That you begin to lose them the more time they spend in jail.
Yeah, once a kid is in detention, things do not look good going forward if you're looking at the research. That doesn't mean that you can't tap in to what's going on in that kid and see things. But the real goal is to realize that juvenile justice is not separated from all of the good work that's going on in our educational systems. And it can't be separated from all of the important work that's looking at what are our future workforce needs here. It's all connected, and it all gets back to the fact that so many people in our community are living not just in first generation, but second and third generation poverty. And that's not going to get fixed by the justice system or by the county commission. That's going to take the whole community.
Yeah.
So before these children reach the court, have we turned around that part of the system that determines, I got a call, I'm a police officer, I got a call to deal with a juvenile, I take that juvenile to juvenile court, or I work out something short of going to court? Have we turned that around yet?
I think the conversations are underway. I think we're looking at important things that the community can do that create these engagement points earlier on in the process. We haven't fixed it. I don't think we've turned it around, to answer your question, but I'm hopeful as we go forward.
Yeah, sure.
2 weeks ago, I got a report from juvenile court. I asked for how many kids are in the system right now, which means there's been a prosecution against this youth, or a court action against this youth. There's 354 kids. Well, what are the alternatives? What the alternatives right now are, some go to MARS, which is mediation, reconciliation, and restitution for first-time offenders. JIF works typically with third-time offenders on up. But all 354 of these kids are on house arrest, monitored bracelets, ankle bracelets. And that's the alternative for those kids.
Right.
And JIF can only get to 100, 150 a year when we need to be getting to 350 a year.
Yeah.
And Mark, what is this discussion like at your level? Because as Eric mentioned, that is really kind of the fallback position. When something really bad happens, we start to see a movement in public opinion toward round them up, lock them up, hard time, or as hard as it can get in the juvenile system.
Bill, I don't really hear that on the county commission. I think we've got a new county commission. A lot of them really come from the grassroots level. They're, I'm a nonprofit professional here in Memphis. We have other people like me and business leaders on the county commission. I think for the most part, we feel an earnest obligation to get better engaged. I think most of us were new, most of the county commissioners were new last year in our first year of office. I think with this upcoming budget cycle, you're going to see a much deeper dive on the budget to see where we can make a difference. Myself, in my areas of police, fire, corrections, and courts, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be getting with Defender Bush really early, with District Attorney Wyrick, with our sheriff, with our courts, to see what we need to really fund. And again, more on a proactive approach versus a lock 'em up approach. And again, I'm not trying to be soft on violent crime, but a lot of this stuff is systemic at the foundation level. If you build a house on sand, it's going to crumble. It's the same way with these kids. If you don't have the basic necessities of food, shelter, and clothing, we're in real trouble. We had 22,000 kids that didn't show up on the first day of school. So I think the county commission is going to have to take a deeper dive than we traditionally have done, and I think we've got those leaders to do it.
Which there's a lot of conversation, obviously nationally, locally with the Darius Stewart situation, about the relationship, the hour-by-hour interaction between police and particularly the African-American community. Right. And I don't think as county commissioners you have a whole lot of control over what goes on with the police department, but the sheriff's department is a big department.
Sure.
How does that play out? I mean, does the sheriff's department need to be reviewing and looking at how it interacts, particularly with youth? Not exclusively, but that's kind of the focus today, particularly with youth, because somebody had said to me, there's this whole thing where, you can ruin a kid's life real quickly because you drive by,
right.
It's on a street corner, maybe he's smoking a joint. Do you choose to, what's it called, the broken window strategy, where you take every violation and you round them up and you come down hard on them, or does that cop drive by, or does that cop drive by and say, hey, put out the joint? I mean, all those really nuanced, which it's a silly example I've given, but I think somebody made the case to me that point of contact between that police officer and that youth can change that kid's life in a way that it doesn't for the police officer. And those choices, do you guys look at that kind of thing as a county commission?
I think we absolutely do, and I give a lot of kudos to our sheriff, Bill Oldham. Bill is starting youth initiative programs on his own, quite frankly, with very, very little, if not any support from a political standpoint. He's reaching out to congregations throughout the county to build relationships between youth and their churches with law enforcement. Recently I was in Miami-Dade County, And they're doing a lot of faith initiatives like Richard Graham is doing at JIF, some things that are outside the box. But I think we do have a responsibility, and I think Tony Armstrong and Bill are doing their best to engage at a positive level.
You also, as public defender, you're public defender over the adult court system as well. Lots of these people you see, I'm sure, as adults started in the juvenile system, and now they're up in the higher level. We've gone through an election season and just a whole cycle of discussion about Blue Crush and that approach. What is your take on Blue Crush? Was that an effective, its advocates say that was an incredibly effective way of hitting crime at its source and getting rid of it. But there were a lot of people at least arrested as a part of that. I don't know how many were locked up. What was your perspective on Blue Crush, and do you think Blue Crush needs to be re-implemented or rethought?
It's the purpose of law enforcement to respond to crime. And the idea behind Blue Crush was to be able to allocate resources where crime was happening in hot spots. I think that's an appropriate thing for law enforcement to be doing, to figure out how to allocate their resources.
But did it bring people, kids, adults, to the court system unnecessarily? I
don't know. We pick up after they're there.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I'll say this, that the community needs to be able to trust law enforcement. That relationship of trust between sheriff's deputies and police officers is absolutely essential to the well-being of
But
this
do the people you represent, do they trust the police? I mean, that's a silly question on some level, but do they trust them?
I think there's a lot of work that could be done to enhance that level of trust. And I think Director Armstrong has been doing some things that are important to rebuild in that area, and the sheriff as well. Okay. It's absolutely essential that as this community works to address deep and intractable problems, that we remember the importance of that ability to trust. So in the context of the important conversations around Blue Crush and numbers of police officers and all of that, it has to be done in the context of overall safety, overall trust in this community.
Yeah. Okay. About 4 minutes left. Bill.
Richard, talk to me about the range of experiences that JIF sees with juveniles who are in the system for their third time.
It really varies. I mean, what we see is some youth that have been through the system 15 times with no intervention. That's a disaster. That's a train wreck waiting to happen.
No intervention in what sense?
No intervention in the form of a mentor relationship, of here's a way for a different lifestyle. We have a lot of youth, as Commissioner Billingsley said, that are looking for jobs. Key to that is having transportation to get to and from those jobs. That's a big issue for our city, from where I sit, is being able to move people around the city to get to viable jobs. What I see is we need more workforce development jobs. We need centers created within, say, Whitehaven or Hickory Hill or wherever it is, Fraser, that people can easily get to areas within their part of the city for a job. That's key. Meaningful jobs. Doing something for Staff Mark, not to put down Staff Mark, but that's a temporary job. We need work training. We need to teach people skills that are meaningful and lasting. And the kids that we see that are in a gang environment, Bill, what they see is, as Mark mentioned, the kid whose mom and dad are both in gangs, he realizes that gangs are not the answer, but he's looking for the alternative. And until he gets to a place like JIF or one of our other agencies, he doesn't know the alternatives. And so that's key, is to open up their eyes, which create a bigger vision and dream for a better life.
And just to be clear about the gang life, and I've heard this from talking to some gang members, there's this image that's on television and in the movies that is this glamorous life, and these kids figure out pretty quickly that that's not what this was ever about.
Right. The gang that's family, but the gang is only as good as long as you're doing their bidding. Yeah. When you try to stop the process, they're not your family anymore. And these kids, when they first come to JIF, the first 4 weeks they're there, their heads are down and they're skeptical and they're not sure what this is all about. about midway through the 16 weeks, they're starting to smile, they're starting to engage, they're starting to interact, and by the end of the 16 weeks, they don't want to leave the program because they've found an alternative.
But when you talk to them about a job in the quote-unquote straight world, it's a little different discussion because they don't immediately get that, yeah, that job may pay less than you made on the street corner, but that job is not like the job selling drugs. That's not a 24-hour-a-day job where you might get shot at while you're at work.
Right. One of our graduates in January became a policeman, went through the Memphis Police Academy. He also lacks 28 hours graduating from the University of Memphis. What that gentleman found out is that he couldn't outrun bullets. And that's what these kids find out. They know that death is a very real thing. When we go through the 16 weeks at JIF, we ask them to complete a sentence. If not for JIF, blank. We hear, I'd be in jail, I'd be in the hospital, and what we hear most is, I would be dead.
Yeah. Are you, Stephen, just a couple of things. Are you hopeful? Do you
I am
feel a
hopeful.
change?
I think, and what you're describing, Richard, is that little piece of hope. When things work, it's wrapped around some hope. And I don't mean to sound like but we can have programs, we can do all sorts of stuff and fund this, that, but that's what you're after. Okay. You're after that kernel of hope.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Stephen Bush, Richard Graham, Mark Billingsley. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
A2H, engineers, architects, and planners, creating an enhanced quality of life for their clients and our community. More about A2H's services and markets is at a2h.com.